So dear ISPP colleagues, dear friends, welcome to the 41st annual meeting of ISPP. It's really a great pleasure to be opening this conference today. I want to, in particular, welcome the people who are here for the first time. And I was going to say that if you're not too shy, who sitting in this room is here for the first time? Welcome. So the people who you'll see with badges, with the little blue tags, they're the people who are part of the governing council, so do not hesitate to come to us, chat with us. We're very willing to let you know more about the society. So, as a president, it's really a pleasure to open the conference around the theme of borders and boundaries and going beyond borders and boundaries. In this address, I'm going to try and convey how in this kind of current societal climate we need to reach beyond borders and boundaries as a society and as researchers. But before I start talking about that, I'd like to thank a list of people. First of all, I'd like to thank Bethany Albertson and Frank Asbrook for these. Could Bethany and Frank just get up so we can all meet you? So Bethany and Frank. They made it all happen. Obviously, all of you who came also made it all happen, but this was the starting point, Bethany and Frank. They have put together a program committee with section chairs, and I want to thank them too. Fiona Barlow, Razata Bilali, Chris Federico, Imo Fritsch, Chris Garpovic, Noor Kataili, Bernard Leidner, Hannah Nam, Clifford Scott, Johannes Ulrich, Johanna van der Nol, and Jenny Volak. So even though ISPP can't directly change the political climate, we've tried to put together a diverse and exciting program that tackles head-on some of these difficult issues that we're currently confronting in society, and what's very much related to borders and boundaries, in my view. So in addition to the section chairs and the program chairs, we have a central office. We have Sev Bennett, who's our executive director, and her assistant, Heather Schlabach, and they kind of responsible for the practical and logistic organization of the ISPP meetings. And actually, Heather has taken over what previously was done by someone who was called a program assistant. She's been doing all this work for the first time this year. So they have done an enormous job. There's been a lot of last-minute frenzy, like always, and they've been dealing with all kinds of special requests. So I would also like to thank Sev and Heather for doing an excellent job. So, before we start getting to the topic, I feel that I need to just give a very basic definition, because everything I'm going to be talking about will be around borders and boundaries. So when I'm talking about borders and boundaries, I'm talking about boundaries between us and them in social psychological terminology, intergroup terminology, the in-group and the out-group. When I mean by boundaries, I mean boundaries what can be tangible, national borders. There can be legislation, institutional boundaries. There can be symbolic boundaries, seeing the world in a certain way, endorsing or contesting certain social order, identification. This is something that I'm considering as symbolic boundaries. These boundaries can be porous, they can be impermeable. That means that they can be easy to cross, more difficult to cross. Tangible, difficult to cross boundary would be a border wall, and that gives us all kinds of ideas from very close by. I'll get to that in a moment. The borders can be seen as legitimate or illegitimate, and both the presence or the absence of borders can both, depending on what kind of perspective we have, can be seen as legitimate or illegitimate. It can be contested or not. So the reason why we're talking about borders and boundaries at this conference is that there's currently, and there has been for some time, a constant and simultaneous tendency to construct and contest boundaries between people. So the idea of this year's conference is to take stock of the scientific and political significance of different forms of boundaries for political psychology. So the way I'm going to outline this talk is that I'm going to talk about borders and boundaries at ISPP San Antonio meeting. Why are we talking about borders and boundaries now and here? What does ISPP as a society do regarding borders and boundaries? Where are we going? Where are we now? I think that's interesting for many of us, both new members and older members, or more senior members, long-time comers to the conference. And in the final part, the more academic part, I'll be talking about some research we're doing in Lausanne around the question of borders and boundaries. So it seems quite consensual to say that the theme is very timely, borders and boundaries related to immigration control, for example. That's the theme I work on quite a bit. Some recent ongoing issues, borders and boundaries in Europe, the refugee crisis, something that is very, very present. We see it all the time in the media. Most recently, just a few days ago, there was a boat coming from Libya that sunk. There was the Aquarius ship that couldn't get to Italy, had to go to Spain. That's typically a question of there's a border, do we let people in or not? There, you can think of ideologies, radical right-wing populism is very much about construction of boundaries between us and them. I'll get to that later on in my talk. Quite ironically, the conference theme is very much related to where we are currently, the state we are currently. There's a border wall being planned between Mexico and Texas. There's the zero tolerance immigration policy, what is being implemented at this very moment, and very tragically, babies and children have been separated from their families, and it's unclear when they'll be reunited. So this is, of course, a very question very much related to borders and boundaries, and it's also something what is contested. So again, there's some people who are building these boundaries, other people who are contesting them. Sadly, the borders and boundaries also affect our conference. There's people who have a hard time getting visas. That's a typical question of borders and boundaries. Some people have a difficult time in getting passports, leaving their countries, a question of borders and boundaries. So we have tried at the conference to make efforts. People who cannot come, we are offering them virtual presentations. Actually, this tragic humanitarian situation of refugees has also triggered a lot of research in political psychology, and we'll be seeing quite a bit of thought-provoking research at the conference. At the same time, in addition to academic research, there's a number of political psychologists in the UK, in Belgium, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Greece, France, and certainly in other places who are actually now volunteering to do a lot of things with refugees, teaching refugees, going to camps. And I think that's typically something what's very much related to the mandate of political psychology, not necessarily the society, that could be discussed. But these political psychologists are not only talking, they're also engaging. And I think that's something what's really great to see. There has been some backlash, and I'm just giving you one example, what is very local. Quite shockingly, 2 weeks ago in Belgium, the Vlaams Belang Youth, that's the Radical Right Party youth section, under the hashtag Make Europe Great Again, they were handing out the contact details of pro-refugee professors to asylum seekers or refugees. These professors had signed a statement calling for open borders, and the right-wing party was giving out their details. So there is backlash there. So just to say how relevant it is, the topic. So we're going to tackle these questions in different ways at the conference. We have different keynotes and invited symposia, some of them, broadly speaking, around contesting and weakening boundaries. We have Steve Wright's talk about collective harm doing. It can be seen when is destructive action by a disadvantaged group acceptable. We can look about weakening boundaries, constructing solidarity in Jack Citrin's last award keynote about politics of solidarity. And in addition to these keynotes, we have 12 invited symposia addressing different forms of boundary making, contestation, attitudes, behaviors related to multiracial relationships, dehumanization, speciesism, and also the question of social media, how social media creates boundaries of information. We also tackle questions of changing and the flexibility of boundaries. And we addressing a topic related to LGTB rights and the recognition of boundaries. So actually this topic, it resonates, again, ironically, with the recent legislation in Texas about the restricted rights of LGBT people. There's some examples. Gender identity is not included in a hate crime law. In Texas, there's no statewide banning of anti-LGBT discrimination. There's conversion therapy, what is legal. That means that there's therapy, what is given the aim to turn gay kids straight, and that's legal in this state. Actually, these restrictions, they have resulted also in some hurdles for the conference, because other states, California is boycotting, and this has implications for our colleagues from California. They don't get funding to come to Texas to give a talk. So to tackle some of these hurdles, we wanted to also introduce a keynote discussing LGBT politics and policy, and we have Don Heider Marco who will be talking about this topic. And a lot of the talks we've had in recent years in ISPP, they've been more focused, the impression I had, on national and ethnic diversity. So it seems that it's also time to go beyond the borders of this discussion and also include other kind of topics too. And so here we have included some invited symposia related to intersectionality, LGBT practitioners. We have a gender and race symposium and a stigma and healthcare invited panel. So these are topics what we might see in the future growing, or again related to borders and boundaries. Beyond borders and boundaries also reflects a key strategic ISPP goal into development to a more global, international and diverse academic society. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment when I discuss ISPP. But now, one way we decided to address this at the current conference was to invite more colleagues from South America to the conference, because there is a very active scene in political psychology in South America, but unfortunately until now there have been very little present at ISPP. So I'm very pleased that we were able to organize 3 invited symposia, one by Salvador Sandoval, presenting different political psychologists from different countries in South America. We have Roberto Gonzalez talking about antecedents of social cohesion, and Hector Carvalho talking about political participation and collective actions in Chile. So I hope that this initiative allows us to strengthen relationships between or with political psychologists from this region. That was one of the reasons also why we are here in San Antonio today. Now, so I've given some arguments why are we, what is the topic and how the topic is relevant to the current societal situation, and why discuss that, the topic in Texas. Now, the second part of this talk is about ISPP as a society. So ISPP turns 40. Actually, last year in Edinburgh, that was the 40th conference, because in the early years, we were very enthusiastic. We had 2 conferences in 1 year. I don't think we would do that anymore. I really don't think so. But actually, that means that 2018 is the 40th anniversary of ISPP. So we're getting through reasonably serenely for this kind of 40th anniversary. There's no massive midlife crisis, but there is some transitions, and I think the transitions we've been working on the transitions since we were in our 30s, so we're getting there, we're developing into a certain direction, we hope, and I'll say a few words about that. So this is kind of a brief moment of a collective self-reflection. So I'm going to give you a few numbers, and then what are we doing with these numbers. So And this is something some of you may know, some of you may have no idea. ISPP was founded in 1978 by Jen N. Knudsen from UCLA, the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She also edited the first handbook of political psychology. So even though we're moving forward, we don't want to forget our history, so we don't want to forget the legacy of ISPP, and for that end we have Yolanda van der Nul and Melinda Jackson, who are working on the ISPP oral history. They've been interviewing past presidents and some award winners, many of whom are kind of the first generation ISPP members, and we want to know more about the society, because people who came afterwards, yeah, they have no idea necessarily. We have our journal, Political Psychology, with advances in political psychology as a supplement. We've had the journal since 1980. The current editor, Katarina Kinval, is doing an excellent job. We're all very happy about the journal. It's our flagship. Currently, we have 850 members from 70 countries. Membership is slightly down. That's pretty consistent with where we have our conferences. It fluctuates between 950 when we have a big conference and 850. But actually, I checked, the countries remain pretty much the same. We have about people from 70 countries, give or take 100 members. This year, we had 350 conference registrations from 36 countries. We have a governing council with 26 members from 10 countries. We have annual scientific meetings in different countries. We have one now, starting in Texas, US. We're going to be in Lisbon next year, Berlin, Montreal, and then we just decided that we'll be going in 22, we'll be in South America. So at this point, we could be very satisfied. We could pat ourselves on the back and say that we're international. But what is the I in international? And I think, especially the people who are on the governing council, they're very aware that more is needed to really call ourselves international. So I have a map here looking at the current membership, and the way it's coded is the countries where we have more than 50 members are in the dark green: US, UK, Germany. Light green, Canada, Netherlands, can't see Israel is here, and Australia. And then we have the purple is between 5 and 20, and the light purple is less than 5. So we have 70 countries, but we have a critical mass in very few of these countries. So the main green part is what I call the Anglo Germanic countries. That's the case. The global south, besides Australia, is anecdotally present. Most of Eastern Europe and Southern Europe are not that well present. We have Turkey is currently purple, but actually last year Turkey would have been in the green, and actually last year Turkey was the fourth largest membership base of ISPP. I'm going to come back to Turkey in a moment. So we're working to get more green on this map. That's the goal, to be more green on this map. And also more green in terms of leadership. I didn't decipher the leadership composition. It is not only from these green countries, but very largely our leadership is from there. So we're also working to be more green on that level. And here I haven't even discussed about ethnic diversity. That is another topic here. I'm only talking about internationalization. So, like I said, that's one of the key strategies we've been discussing, and the governing council members know we've been discussing it for a long time, and we can come back to it over and over again. I think now we've been making some progress. I don't want to undermine the previous governing councils. We've been making progress, but I think now we're making larger leaps. At least that's how I see things. But there's still a gap between our principles and the implementation of our principles into getting ISPP to be an international and diverse, ethnically diverse academic society. So we're trying to narrow the principal implementation gap at the moment. We're doing it in several ways. We have an internationalization and diversity vice president who has worked on a strategic report. Nick Valentino has worked closely with Johanna Volhert and a committee to create a strategic report. We have a diversity report was commissioned. Kate Reynolds and Shua Jim Leon Yo have made a diversity report based on Kate's keynote last year, mapping how the composition of leadership and awards has changed regarding to gender and internationalization. So there's been progress, but again, the conclusion of the report is that there's more to do, and this is a report we will be sharing with the society. And one of the decisions we made, a large decision, is to have a diversity advocate in all of the ISPP committees from now on. So there will be progress. We'll be changing here. In addition, we're having a roundtable organized by Johanna Volhard, touching upon the question of internationalization and diversity of ISPP. And we're organizing for the first time an event for participants who come from underrepresented countries. And we hope that this could be something that we can continue in the future. So now to the question of Turkey. We also want to keep our colleagues from Turkey within the boundaries of ISPP and academia. Like I said, in 2017, Turkey was the fourth largest group in terms of countries, in terms of ISPP membership. Only 7 years ago, we organized a memorable meeting in ISPP in 2011. And we had our first summer academy at that point. It was launched in Istanbul. The call for papers for the conference then announced, and I quote, "In a globalized world, human cooperation has the potential to minimize religious, geographic, and cultural differences. What better place to examine these issues than a cosmopolitan Istanbul? This vision currently seems very distant." A bit of background. So after signing a peace petition in 2016 calling for the termination of human rights violations, many political psychologists, many members of ISPP in Turkey have faced severe consequences. Some have been trialed or are going to be trialed. Some have lost their jobs. Some have had their passports cancelled. And I'm really deeply sorry that our colleagues have to endure this kind of situation. So ISPP has been concerned about this situation for a while, and we have issued as a society statements supporting the academic freedom of our colleagues from Turkey. And most recently, we've had a statement what was co-signed by several societies: the European Society of Social Psychology, the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, Society for Personality and Social Psychology, the Social Psychology Network, the British Psychological Society Social Psychology Section, and the French Social Psychology Society. So there's a lot of support in this movement to support academic freedom of our colleagues in Turkey. We created this year a new committee among many committees in the society, a committee for political psychologists under threat. And the idea of this committee is to monitor and coordinate different actions of ISPP to support political psychologists whose academic freedom is under threat. So the idea is we started off with the case Turkey, but we hope to have readiness if and when ISPP members elsewhere in the world face such a situation. So I'm going to point out three things we are currently doing, and what you might have heard of if you read the newsletters. We have a Scholars Under Threat Fund, and we're collecting funds to help in emergency situations and some kind of research funds for our colleagues in Turkey. ISPP will match all contributions up to $40,000. We initially through this conference, but we've decided to extend this. So if you now do it during the conference, you can double your gift. I've noted on the top, on the slide up here, If you go on our website, on the top right-hand side, there's a donation button. You can just click. You can open our app, conference app. You can click. You can donate. People who donate, we have little stickers. I support Scholars at Risk, ISPP, and then you can be carrying around. You'll see people walking around with the stickers. We will be giving information of how much we raise during the week. I'll show that slide in a moment. In addition to this, we have a roundtable by Masinor and Kate Reynolds where we'll be discussing various actions what we are currently doing. To support killings in Turkey, we've had trial observers. We had Dave Redlux, Masinor from the Governing Council, who went with Steve Reich in January to Istanbul to observe a trial. We've joined Scholars at Risk Network, an international network that's mission is to protect scholars and promote academic freedom. If you're interested in getting involved, if you're interested in knowing more, please join the roundtable. And I already want to thank people who have donated and some who potentially will. We have a thermometer here. Currently, you can see what we have. And we want to get here. We want to increase. So we're counting on our conference goers to help out, and we will be, this thermometer hopefully will be going up during the week. So you've certainly noticed that in this second part, I've mentioned several members of the Governing Council. There's a lot of more people who I could mention. All of the Governing Council is doing a lot, and also other people who are not necessarily on the Governing Council are doing a lot for the society, so I wasn't able to mention everybody. But we also want to include the members in the discussion. So we do have a business meeting, and business meeting means members. It means a meeting for members, and we would like to invite as many of you who are able to come July 6th, Salon 8, 1 o'clock. Come and meet the Governing Council. The Governing Council will be here. Find out what's going on. Have a voice. We'll be discussing, in addition to the internationalization situation in Turkey, future meetings. There'll be finances, the situation of the journal, well, the search of a new editorial team, restructuration. That is something we are also doing in our 40s. It's the aim to improve our strategic planning and our decision-making organs. It's not a full facelift, but it's get fit at 40 and have a better health and function better. So if you are interested, do come to the business meeting and tell us what you think. We really want to hear also the members' view. Besides the membership survey, that's the only place where we can hear. There's a lot of kind of gossip we hear around at the receptions, but we could have an official discussion around these topics. And we are considering changing the name to members' meeting from business meeting, because business meeting apparently isn't very appealing. So the last part of my talk is kind of the more academic part, is borders and boundaries in the recent research I've been doing with my colleagues in Lausanne. And it'll be snippets of different findings in different projects in different contexts, because I wanted to kind of give an overview of how borders and boundaries from different perspectives can be examined. And I want to highlight that it's a two-way process, like I started off the talk, boundary making, boundary contestation. And I want to look at both the point of view of the advantaged national majorities as well as the disadvantaged subordinate minorities that can be ethnic groups, immigrant groups, national minorities. So I'll start by showcasing two projects where we look at group boundary demarcation from the perspective of advantaged national majorities. So first of all, I present an example, very briefly, all these examples about research showing the impact of ideological climates on anti-immigration attitudes here more kind of seeing immigration as a threat among national majorities. And when ideological climates, I see them as a normative context in which individuals are embedded, what shape their way of thinking about, for example, immigration. So here, I have a focus on a specific manifestation of ideological climates. And we're looking at the impact of integration policies, and I see this as a form of institutional boundary making. So the policies convey boundary making. They can be define whether immigrants have access to certain resources, what the national majority members have access to, to what extent are they able to participate in decision making, for example, voting. So that's one way of creating boundaries. Integration policies, they can convey the norm of the governmental orientation towards cultural diversity, can be assimilationist, multiculturalist, and so these boundaries can be more inclusive or more exclusive. And I'll be looking at the European context, looking at how integration policies shape the impact of intergroup contact on immigration threat perceptions. And I'm doing this in a 20-country study from a kind of a multi-level perspective. So our argument is that integration policies convey institutional support. That was one of the initial requirements for intergroup contact to function in the initial theorizing, and how institutional support is beneficial, and beneficial being how it reduces prejudice. So we'll be looking at the well-known link between contact and prejudice reduction, but in addition, looking at how inclusive integration policies can shape this relationship and discourage anti-immigrant prejudice. So just very briefly, the way we are kind of measuring operationalizing institutional boundary making, we're looking at migrant integration policy index with several sub-dimensions related to education, health, anti-discrimination, access to nationality, for example. So I'm not going to be showing any statistics here. I thought it's too much for a talk with so many examples and for the first evening. So I'm just summarizing results. I'm going to give you the information of where the data comes from and what analysis has been conducted for those who are interested in the analytical part. So this was European Social Survey. It's a multi-level model with a cross-level interaction for the technical details. But what we wanted to look at, controlling for a variety of things. We wanted to look at the impact of inclusive institutional boundary making, put it this way. So we find this very well-known link between everyday contact with immigrants negatively related to threat perceptions. We find that in contexts with tolerant migrant policies, there's less anti-immigrant threat perceptions, there's more contact, accounting for a whole series of other controls for those who are wondering. And importantly, that the migration policies shape the relationship between contact and anti-immigrant threat perceptions. So it means that the beneficial effect of contact reducing threat perceptions is stronger in contexts, where intolerant contexts. So this suggests that inclusive policies foster a cohesive stance regarding immigration. We have other research which shows other things related to polarization, but it won't get to that. But this is one finding, that having tolerant policies, they set a norm, it's inclusive boundary making, and they do shape the impact of individual level interactions and how they further shape immigration attitudes. A second example is right-wing populism. Like I said in the beginning of the talk, it's also populism also attempts to restrict the representation of the nation and uses multiple within and between group strategies of boundary making. This is work I've done with Christian Sterkle, and we look at the representation of the nation from a populist perspective, and we distinguish horizontal dimension between us, the national in-group, the people like us against them, immigrant out-groups who threaten our way of life, who reject pluralism. So the idea is that there's this right-wing populism is constructed about this generic opposition between insiders, the us, and the outsiders, them. People like us and people who are not like us. Can be in terms of ethnicity, can be in terms of ideology, can be in terms of national origin. So it's very much related to cultural diversity. Then there's this vertical aspect of us, the ordinary people, versus them, the political elite, the vertical dimension of populism. And we can probably safely say that the leader of the current country we're in, the US, is doing very well in both forms of boundary making, horizontal and vertical boundary making. So what we did, I'm going to be very brief, we compared in 4 countries, the UK, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands and Switzerland. We compared right-wing populist party identifiers, traditional left-wing socialist and traditional right-wing conservative parties across these countries, and we looked at certain ways how they create boundaries, horizontal and vertical boundaries. So again, we're using the same data set, but focusing on different aspects. And if you look at the horizontal boundary making, we see like cultural threat being one way of distinguishing between us and them, that it's clear that the populists do much more of this than the right-wing, traditional right-wing and the left-wing. But when you look at vertical boundary construction, and here institutional trust being an indication of trusting the elite or not, populists are least trusting, and here the left-wing is less trusting than the right-wing. And this, we argue, so we have this sequence of populist right-wing, left-wing, and here we have the sequence of populist left-wing, right-wing. It shows that right-wing populism is not just an extreme form of right-wing conservatism, it's qualitatively different, and these boundary-making strategies of right-wing populism combine these elements of both right-wing and left-wing political discourse. So these 2 examples were from looking at how advantaged majorities, what kind of boundary making can be related to different attitudes of advantaged majorities. So I have 3 examples of disadvantaged minorities, and this research, it contributes to the contact literature. So disadvantaged minorities, they can contest the boundaries, they can contest disadvantage, but they often also contribute to maintaining the boundaries, maintaining power status quo. And the research on sedative effects of positive contact speak to this phenomenon. So there's, for those who are not familiar with sedative effects of contact, so there's ample evidence that positive contact is related to reduced prejudice. My first example showed that, but there's literature for the last 60 years showing that. But there's also more recent evidence of other implications of positive contact for disadvantaged minorities. There's research showing that disadvantaged outgroups, when they have positive contact, they might be less supportive of social change, what benefits themselves, and they might be more accepting of power status quo. So I'm going to be showing some research related to this. The first example I'll be showing will be research conducted among Palestinians on the West Bank. That's my third example, after the first 2, what I already showed you. Then I've got 2 examples showing how we can counteract this sedative effect. One mechanism, what has been shown, that when disadvantaged groups have positive contact, they identify less with their group. And identification with the group, as you know, is necessary for collective action. And we are looking how subjective and objective inclusion to the nation can counteract this effect, sedative effects. And we're looking at research conducted among Roma in Bulgaria and Kosovo Albanians in Switzerland. So these are, again, very brief examples. So a little bit of context. There's over 12 million Palestinians in the world and a little bit less than 3 million on the West Bank. And we were looking at research, at two mechanisms, two ways, two different forms of social change, to put it this way. And this is work what I'm doing collect with Mai Albzur, who's doing a PhD with me within a larger project. And I think it's not too quite consensual to say that the Israel-Palestinian conflict is one of the most complex and controversial conflicts in current political history, and the question of borders and boundaries is obviously very present in this conflict. And it has been very present since a very long time, from the 1947 partition plan. And the idea of this research was to look at how positive contact affects different forms of social change. Resistance being a form of social change where we contest, challenge current power relations, but there's a different form of social change, what is called normalization. And I'm going to say a few words about normalization. It's a term what is very controversial and politicized in Palestine. It's a term what has been used since the Oslo peace agreements in '93 that characterizes policies that aim to recognize the state of Israel and establish so-called normal relations between Israelis and Palestinians. And this is something what the Palestinian Authority has been supportive of, and that's important to keep in mind. So since the peace negotiations collapsed, there's been more critics, and the argument has been that these policies might serve or do serve to perpetuate power asymmetry. And like I said, that the concept of normalization does not only reflect the policies establishing mutual relationships between Palestinians and Israelis, but also includes the role of a third party, this being the Palestinian Authority, who manages these relationships. So we conducted this study. This is the first study, and there's more we have data will hopefully be presented at this conference. It's part of a larger project coordinated by my colleague Giel Sharot, and we're collecting data in Palestine, or he's leading the project in Burundi and in Sri Lanka. But here we are only looking at Palestine. What we found is that in line with, since like I was saying, there's two forms of social change. One what challenges the power, one what would be more in line with the power status quo. When Palestinians from the West Bank have positive interactions with Israel in line with the sedative effects of contact, there's less support for resistance, and it's more related to support for normalization. And we're looking at very different facets of normalization, having interpersonal relations, cultural cooperation, civilian policies, and security coordination. And what we also find is this kind of, if we go into statistics and mediation, that when we have positive contacts, it's related to less motivation to resist, and this further then increases or is positively then related to normalization. So there's these two opposite means for societal change. One involves power shift and other power status quo. And like I said, it's important to keep in mind that we're not only talking about Palestine-Israel power relations, but also about the Palestinian Authority who maintains a power position in this current configuration. So this was one example. And then in the broader research program we have, we want to look at how we can counteract these sedative effects of contact. And the argument is, in terms of borders and boundaries, that being included in the realm of the nation is one factor that can counteract. And we studied this among Roma in Bulgaria, looking at how national identification buffers the sedative effect of contact. And this is Adrian Pereira, who is also doing a PhD with me, who's working on this this topic. So we're talking about Roma, that is a 5% sedentary minority in Bulgaria. Most of us think that the Roma are nomadic, but actually there's largely sedentary. They've been severely rejected throughout history, dehumanized, and they're not seen as part of the nation by the national majority. And we wanted to look at whether, when Roma feel that they are part of Bulgaria, to what extent does that buffer these sedative effects of contact. So here again, we're looking at this research or this pattern, what has been presented in previous research. When Roma have positive interactions with the Bulgarian majority, they are less supportive of ethnic activism, what is beneficial for them. What happens is that it's negatively related to ethnic identification as a Roma, that being the transnational Roma flag. However, if Roma feel they identify as Bulgarian, if they feel subjective, if they subjectively feel that they're included in the nation, there's this indirect effect that this sedative effect, this reduction of ethnic identification, is only present when one does not identify with the nation. So if one felt part of, like I said, if one felt subjectively included to the nation, this sedative effect did not occur. So this is among Roma population who they have the Bulgarian passport, so they are citizens. Now then, what happens when one is not a citizen? And here we come to my last example, how objective inclusion to the nation, that is having the citizenship, in this case as an immigrant, how can that buffer the sedative effect of contact? And we're studying this in a totally different group. We have the Kosovo Albanians coming to Switzerland. Kosovo Albanians are a minority of the foreign population, but they are a very stigmatized minority. They are 5% of the foreign population in Switzerland. Switzerland has had, even when during the existence of Yugoslavia, we had immigrants, labor immigrants, coming from Yugoslavia to Switzerland, but during the war, the immigration increased. So we wanted to see that if these immigrants have citizenship, Swiss citizenship, does this buffer the sedative effects of contact? And you must know that in Switzerland, it's really hard to get citizenship. So even second generation immigrants do not get citizenship at birth. So it's a question what's relevant to ask. Here we're looking at positive, when Kosovo Albanians have positive contact with native Swiss, to what extent is this related to reduced ethnic activism? Here we do not have a direct link, but positive contact is negatively related to ethnic identification. And here I took an example. Now it's a little bit outdated. It's an example. The sign, the hand sign, was very controversial 2 weeks ago when the Swiss won the soccer match in the World Soccer against Serbia. And the Swiss Kosovo Albanian players, they were showing this sign which symbolizes the Albanian flag. And it's a sign, but I have it here as the depiction. The Kosovo Albanians in Switzerland is a sign of identification. And it shows that the memory of the conflict is still very present. So, but now it's no longer relevant in terms of soccer, because Sweden beat Switzerland yesterday. So, yeah, anyway. Positive contact is negatively related to identification, which then reduces ethnic activism. However, this is buffered by having Swiss citizenship. So if you are objectively included in the nation by having citizenship, this sedative effect does not occur. So objective inclusion in the nation had a protective effect. So in this part of my talk, I've been arguing that boundary making is politicized, and it can be, or in the entire talk, that it can be triggered by different societal events. It can be legitimized by ongoing political circumstances. And then I wanted to show some recent research, what we are doing in Lausanne around the conference theme. And I was arguing that boundary making is a two-way process involving the advantaged majorities and the disadvantaged subordinate minorities. I showed research about the impact of immigration policies, integration policies, arguing that they are an institutional form of boundary making, and that inclusive policies did foster a cohesive stance regarding immigration. I showed you some research about the political project of right-wing populism, and how it involved vertical and horizontal boundary making. And then the final part, 3 examples of the sedative effect of contact, and how inclusion within the boundaries of a nation, be it subjective or objective, can buffer this effect. As a conclusion of this research, I would like to encourage that we do more research going beyond borders. I know that many of us are doing it already, but doing more research in contexts with what are underrepresented in political psychology. And largely, many countries in the world are underrepresented in the research we publish. I want to kind of encourage people to do more research. It's eye-opening on a personal level, it's eye-opening on an academic level, but in particular, it's necessary to understand what's going on in society at the moment. There's challenges, not the least that many of our concepts are very well established, what we like using, they just don't work when you take them out of context, or they mean something totally different. Nevertheless, it's worth it, and I really think that political psychology as a discipline needs it. And I think this is yet another way to work on the I in our acronym ISPP. So, we're coming to the end of the talk, and I just want to welcome everybody once again. This moment, this conference, it's a moment once a year we come together as a community. We should enjoy it, we should chat. Let's chat, enjoy with new friends, old friends, have a drink. We can enjoy it. 4th of July, I guess. The flag is here for that reason. And I want to invite you to the welcome reception, what will be taking place at Salon del Rey. And yeah, welcome, enjoy the conference, and support scholars in the process. Thank you. Okay. So it's on the 2nd floor, the welcome reception. Yeah, Salon del